From the Hill. House approves statehood for D.C. in 232 to 180 votes. The House on Friday approved landmark legislation granting statehood to Washington, D.C. in a 232 to 180 vote. The vote was historic, marking the first time either chamber has passed legislation to elevate the district to the 51st state and empower its residents with long-sought voting representation within the halls of Congress. Calls for Washington, D.C. to gain statehood have gained steam amid the national calls for racial justice that have followed the police killing of George Floyd last month. The issue is highly partisan, and Friday's outcome reflected it. Every Democrat except one, Representative Collin Peterson of Minnesota, voted in favor of the proposal, which was sponsored by D.C. Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton, while every Republican opposed it. The vote is also largely symbolic since Senate Republicans oppose D.C. statehood and are certain to ignore Norton's bill, while President Trump has promised to veto the proposal if it somehow makes it as far as his desk. But just months before November's elections, Democrats are hoping to highlight their legislative priorities for voters to see, and Floyd's death in custody of Minneapolis police on May 25th, which unleashed a flood of pressure on Congress to tackle racism across broad facets of American culture, has given new life to a host of years-old proposals designed, at least in part, to empower African Americans and other minorities. For supporters, granting statehood to D.C. is another extension of that message, an effort to enfranchise voters in a city that's boasted a majority-minority population for decades. People in the District of Columbia pay taxes, fight our wars, risk our lives for our democracy, and yet they have no vote in the House or Senate about whether we go to war and about how those taxes are exacted and how this is all played, Speaker Nancy Pelosi said in the Capitol a few hours before the vote. We're at a state of compromise, and we think it is very long overdue. Now, I responded to this, or maybe you could call it a reaction tweets, but I had something to say about this, and I'm going to share that with you here since not everybody who watches my videos is on Twitter. This is a power grab, and its proponents are disingenuous. They want to make a case for Guam, Puerto Rico, or some other American territory, then by all means. But D.C. goes beyond racial justice. This is just about conquering an empire. Make no mistake, D.C. is a foothold of the globalists, and its senators would be echoing their voices, not those of its constituents. D.C. will also likely change its own laws as the city transforms, becomes a veritable mecca of the woke. In doing so, the city may well transform in shape, excising those monuments to history they deem problematic. Also, I'm calling it now, D.C. will be renamed something appropriate to this current movement. And it would not surprise me in the least if this led to us choosing a new capital. I probably lose people when I state this is all about globalism. But really, it is. All this intersectionality BS is about alienating the dominant culture, which is viewed not just as tyrannical or oppressive, but as trespassers, occupiers. In countries formed by white Europeans, especially the Anglophonic ones, since our shared tongue conducts this strain of revolution so well, we are shamed for colonizing, developing industry, infrastructure, and displacing natives and imposing alien laws. And in the process of becoming the dominant race, we subjugated the locals and treating them not as citizens or second-class citizens, but worse, as slaves, dogs, less than human, denying them rights to exercise their culture, speak their own language, or practice their own religion. And if that wasn't bad enough, we bought and sold minority populations, ripping them from their native lands and dooming them to a life of slavery, forever alienating them from their people and culture, a people without an identity, without agency. And that even as we modernize these lands, we never cared to treat them as equals, yet continued to deny them rights and opportunities and pathologized their behavior as congenital, insisting they are just wired that way, ever failing to acknowledge systemic oppression. Never acknowledging guilt, the blood we have on our hands, never bothering to make amends, restore what we have destroyed, or pay any reparations for our criminal past. So from the very beginning, we have been the aggressors, trespassing on native lands and thus have no real claim to the land. Yet since we are not going to leave, at the very least, in the majority, we must agree to pay. Yet since we are not going to leave, at the very least, we in the majority must agree to pay overdue reparations to the indigenous peoples and to the minorities we brought along the way, to build our respective countries, and also to agree to share the land with anyone else who wishes to migrate here. And this last part is the keystone, and ultimately completes a bridge long awaited by those who have lusted over these prosperous lands and their resources. So, these are my thoughts. We have countries where there weren't countries. And yes, we might have fought for them, we might have stolen them, but regardless of where it came from, regardless of how these countries got established, they're here where they weren't. It's not exactly like you could say that there was a real political entity or identity where we are currently living. These lands were fought over many times by the tribes that lived here. And this is in America, this is in Canada, and in Australia. The native peoples have been fighting over those territories among each other, right? They were not developed. They didn't have what we have now. And to treat it like it is just, to act like we should just be giving this back to them, no. To act like, well, we should just open our borders. If we're going to be occupying this land anyway, at least we should be fair and let others live here. I would say no. I mean, with a caveat, I would say we should permit immigration like all civilized countries do, but we should be very careful about immigration because there's this tendency with immigration to exploit the next wave of any given population. So in the United States, we didn't just subjugate the Native Americans and the blacks that we brought over. We did this with everybody. We did this with the Italians. We did this with the Irish. We're doing this with the Mexicans right now. We do have a tendency to do that. And there, even as far back as the 1800s, people said we don't want these immigrants here. We don't want to hire them because it's unfair competition. The next minority comes in and they're willing to work for a little bit less than those who have been there for a while. That's not good. That's not good for minimum wage laws. I don't think it's good for anybody. All that does is it unnecessarily creates competition where there shouldn't necessarily be competition. So I think we have a right to sovereignty. Now that this country is here, this is our birthright. Those of us who are Americans, and this isn't just white people. This is Native Americans. This is Hispanic Americans. If you're born in this country, or if you've gone through the process to become an American citizen, this is your country. And others shouldn't just be able to skip that line. And they shouldn't be able to just rush right through that border and say, okay, now that we're here, we need jobs. Give us jobs. No, I don't think that's right. And it would collapse an economy. I mean, we're already at the precipice of total collapse with this COVID crisis. But I am absolutely sure that is what all of this is about. This whole Black Lives Matter thing, this whole racial justice thing, it's not what it seems. It really is about critical race theory, and it's about telling the dominant culture you don't have a right to dominate. Even if you're in the majority, you don't have a right to dominate. Well, tough. Sorry. But when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And you want to build up your populations, your demographics, by all means. But don't tell the dominant population that they're wrong for being there. They're not. Especially when they had nothing to do with what got the country started in the first place. So, I'm not going to apologize for anything. And I'm not going to allow us to be invaded. I won't stand for that. I will stand for protecting our borders. And no, I'm not a Trump supporter. But I do think that we should actually defend our borders. I think we should have borders. That shouldn't be a controversial statement. But apparently it is. So that's where I stand on these issues. And people will say, you're a racist, you're a colonizer. I don't care. I know I'm not. I'm not a racist. And I'm not a colonizer. But this is our land now. And I don't care how we got it. It's our land. And we're not giving it up. Not without a fight. And there will be a fight. What's been going on, toppling statues across this country, trying to erase the culture, erase history, destroy our heroes, tell us that we're wrong for admiring our heroes. I won't stand for that. And I hope other Americans won't stand for it either. I hope they have the courage to speak up, because this is not tolerable. We're going to lose our political identity, and with that, we're going to lose our laws. We're going to lose our Constitution. If this ends up going the way I think it is, we end up being like a one world government, the United States Constitution will be dissolved. And some other rights that some other countries decided are important will take that place. But it won't be like it was. We're not going to have freedom of speech. We're definitely not going to have the right to bear arms. We won't have the rights to avoid unnecessary search and seizure, habeas corpus. Things that make America great. Gone. And this isn't a nationalist perspective, but it is a very American perspective. Our Constitution is beautiful, and it's not perfect, but the beautiful thing about what it is, it's a living document, and it is amendable. That is the one thing that you could say that our founding fathers really, really got right, is that we can change the Constitution. And yeah, we do need to see some more amendments. But it doesn't mean you throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is what I'm hearing. I'm hearing a lot of people saying that we need to ditch the Constitution completely because it was written by racist white men. Maybe I can put that into this video I'll hold up. But yeah, that's the kind of thing I want to avoid. So, if you're a red-blooded American, I hope you're with me. I hope you have the courage to speak up, because this year's going to get really, really bumpy. DC won't be the first. It won't be the last. It's going to change the game, because this is all about power. It's about transforming the culture entirely. And like I said, I can't abide it. I like our way of life. I don't like systemic racism. I don't like some of the oppression I'm seeing. I believe that there is real police brutality out there. I think that there's excessive force. I think that we do need real police reform. Absolutely. But what I'm seeing are excuses. Excuses, basically jumping onto the George Floyd protests and turning it into something completely different. I don't know. I'll leave it there. I'll see you all later. Bye.